This is not about being anti-anything. This is about being pro-girls, pro-females, pro-women, pro-ladies. You can't be a male, born a male, transitioning to female, and think that you should have the right to compete with women. Not in basketball, not in football, not in boxing, not in the UFC.
Nobody expected yesterday's press conference to become complete sports media chaos. But everything changed when one coach made a controversial comment about men playing in the WNBA, and suddenly, Stephen A. Smith appeared to go into overdrive. The reaction was loud, intense, and somehow even more shocking than the original statement. So, what exactly was said that pushed one of the biggest personalities in sports media into such a heated reaction? Trust me, the deeper you get into this story, the crazier it becomes.
The WNBA has opened up Pandora's box, fam. All right, from the Seattle game against the Indiana Fever all the way to the Minnesota game against the Indiana Fever, there was shenanigans, right, in the Seattle arena with the co-owner getting suspended for 5 games, and then the Cheryl Reeve t-shirt. Y'all doing this against the most popular team in the league, and now all of a sudden you have inspired a trans player to join the league. Hey, I wonder if reporters mustered up the courage to ask Cheryl Reeve.
2 people connected to the same WNBA controversy suddenly found themselves on completely different sides of the spotlight within just 1 week. One of them was hit with a fine and banned from entering her own arena for 5 games.
Here's her support for trans athletes. She's the coach of the Minnesota Lynx. She wore a shirt that said "Trans kids belong" before a game against Fever. Now, that could be a split-tongue comment. Be very careful, because they do belong. However, since you're in the setting of a WNBA game, do they belong now on a WNBA court is where people are taking it in assumption, right? Now, if you wore that shirt at an elementary school, then you'd be like, no problem.
The other showed up in a simple t-shirt, guided her team to victory, and later appeared at a press conference after certain reporters had been denied access to the building that evening. Neither person ever expected to become the symbol of the same heated debate, yet somehow, that is exactly where they ended up.
That same vein, in that story with ESPN, you talked about wanting to protect young girls who shouldn't have to go against biological men. Just can you expand your viewpoint on that?
I mean, I think I said what I said. I think it's kind of common sense.
From the Stephen A. Smith show, where he decided to jump out there and let WNBA coach for the Minnesota Lynx, Cheryl Reeve, have it for what she had been doing for these last couple days, what she said in that press conference in response to Sophie Cunningham, then going to the game and wearing that shirt to push the message that she was trying to get out there.
When you compare how both situations were handled, the contrast points to something far bigger than just one fine, one missed game, or one headline. It all began on a Tuesday night in Seattle at Climate Pledge Arena, where the Storm hosted a Fever team that had somehow become the center of attention in nearly every major conversation surrounding women's basketball at the time.
We gotta stop this. We gotta stop acting like somebody that's speaking up on behalf of girls, like a Sophie Cunningham, like a Riley Gaines, are scourges of the earth. You are Cheryl Reeve, the head coach of the Minnesota Lynx. That is an irresponsible thing to do. You are a coach for a female basketball team. Do you not think that the females are being screwed over if they have to compete against an individual born as a male?
Outside the arena, a small group had gathered to show their support for Fever guard Sophie Cunningham, who had spent the previous several weeks openly and repeatedly stating that she did not believe biological males who had transitioned should compete against women. Inside the arena, 2 teenage fans were seated courtside wearing shirts marked XX and XY, referring to the chromosome pairs associated with biological sex. They also held signs thanking Cunningham for speaking out on their behalf. According to the girls, that was when Storm co-owner Celeste Keaton approached them personally and allegedly used language so harsh that it would soon dominate sports headlines across the country. She reportedly told the girls that they were being ridiculous for supporting Cunningham. But the situation was already much bigger than that single interaction. Inside the arena, Seattle Center's Stephanie Dolson was wearing a shirt that read, "Trans rights are human rights," and was reportedly seen applauding when anti-initiative messaging appeared on the video board. So, before Keaton ever approached those two teenagers, the atmosphere inside the building was already deeply divided. That makes her alleged outburst seem less like an isolated moment and more like the point where all the tension in the arena finally boiled over.
Up, man. The WNBA can't stay out of its own way, but for us, it's the gift that keeps on giving. Cheryl Reeve doesn't want men coaching in the WNBA, but she's okay with men playing in the WNBA. Stephen A. Smith absolutely went at and blasted Cheryl Reeve on his pod. A WNBA coach who wore a Trans Kids Belong shirt to troll Sophie Cunningham gets upset whenever men take coaching jobs from women.
The timing made the situation look like more than a coincidence. Several outlets, including Fox News and Outkick, requested media credentials for the game 2 days before the team's deadline, but all were denied without explanation. No one can prove the denials were linked to the t-shirt controversy, yet the timing raised questions. Suddenly, the story was no longer just about the shirt, it was also about who was allowed to ask questions about it. What made Reeve's timing even more unusual was that this wasn't her first time speaking out on the same issue. That position also seems to clash with another stance she has taken publicly. It is a legitimate concern, but it sits awkwardly beside a t-shirt suggesting that competitive fairness should not determine who is allowed to play women's basketball. One argument focuses on protecting opportunities specifically for women, while the other suggests that biology should not be the standard for defining who qualifies as a woman in the first place. Yet, on that Sunday, nobody inside the building appeared willing to challenge her to explain how those two positions fit together.
Scorch earth on Cheryl Reeve and the WNBA, dog. Y'all can hear Stephen A. was just cooking. I mean, that man had the stove on, the oven, the microwave, the crock pot, whatever could cook, he was cooking it, all right? And honestly, it might be too late, Stephen A. It might be too late to try to actually make sense of it all, because now you have a 6'3" French trans phenom averaging 20 and 20, Julie, okay? Everybody meet Julie.
Naturally, this is exactly the kind of contradiction Stephen A. Smith would not ignore, and he made sure to address it. Speaking on ESPN, he made his position clear from the very beginning. He stressed that his argument was not about being against anyone, but about standing up for girls, women, and the athletes competing under the WNBA banner. He argued that someone born male who later transitions to female should not compete against women in sports such as basketball or football. He extended that argument beyond basketball, saying the same principle should apply to boxing, the UFC, and even tennis. He brought up tennis deliberately because the physical differences between elite male and female athletes can be expressed through measurable performance rather than simply personal opinion. His argument was that the athletic gap between top-level men and women is significant enough to be demonstrated statistically, and ignoring that difference does not make it disappear. From there, he shifted his attention directly toward Reeve, and that was when the discussion stopped sounding like a broad sports opinion and began to feel much more like a direct accusation.
A. Smith. I agree with Stephen A. Smith on almost nothing these days. But the one thing that Stephen A. Smith has not backed down from and has been vocal about and is now come out smashing the hell out of Cheryl Reeve, it's the idea of letting trans people in the women's locker rooms, in the women's bathrooms, in the women's sports. Stephen A. Smith, regardless of him working for ESPN, said, nah, I'm not down with that.
Stephen A. Smith questioned how a WNBA coach could dismiss players who raise concerns about competitive fairness. He argued that the controversy affects athletes, sponsors, the league's growth, and its business interests. Meanwhile, transgender players overseas have already dominated women's basketball leagues and openly expressed interest in the WNBA. The league's own policies now make the debate more complicated, yet no major team has publicly addressed the possibility. That leaves a major contradiction between what the league promotes, what some coaches say, and what its rules actually allow. Ultimately, the real test will come when WNBA leadership is forced to answer the question publicly and directly.